Alright, I've been asked a few times to do a video on Kyle Kulinski, the host of Secular Talk, who is also part of the Young Turks, and I'll do more general videos on him in the future, but there is a video he recently posted that I have to respond to because it is just obscene in how disingenuous and ill-informed it is. In this video, Kyle Kulinski here essentially says that Alan Greenspan was a purist in his libertarianism and that Greenspan, quote, really drank the Kool-Aid, and he really believed the Ayn Rand, Milton Friedman pure libertarian worldview, and he thought less government the better, regulation is bad by definition, leave it all to the free market, it'll work itself out, end quote. So that's the image Kulinski here is trying to paint of Greenspan, and it is extraordinarily disingenuous. But in a way I could see why he thinks this, because it's relatively obvious Kulinski simply read Greenspan's Wikipedia page and that's about it. He did no further research whatsoever, because it is true. Greenspan has referred to himself as a libertarian Republican, and he was friends with Ayn Rand early on, and much of Greenspan's rhetoric early on was laced with all sorts of libertarian-sounding ideas. But whatever Greenspan's personal worldview might have been, he absolutely did not live up to anything a libertarian would have even remotely deemed acceptable. There is a huge reason why no libertarians were celebrating while Greenspan was chairman of the Federal Reserve. In fact, it's funny because Kulinski here shows Bernie Sanders grilling Alan Greenspan earlier in the video that you're looking at now. But notice how he doesn't show the footage of Ron Paul going for the jugular on Greenspan as well. Ron Paul, by the way, Kyle Kulinski, is an actual libertarian, so I could just ask you to explain why one of the most libertarian members of Congress in modern history had a myriad of criticisms of Greenspan, and how could that possibly be if Greenspan and Ron Paul were both two peas in a libertarian pot, right? That's just completely incoherent. But of course, Kyle Kulinski doesn't show that footage of Ron Paul grilling Greenspan over his praise of central banking and Greenspan's assertion that fiat currency might be a system that could be saved. Of course he wouldn't show that because that would hurt his narrative. Kyle Kulinski, sorry man, you are so disingenuous here. So let's start here. It was said by John Rubino that, quote, when the history of these times is written, former Fed Chair Alan Greenspan will be one of the major villains, but also one of the greatest mysteries. This is so because he has, in effect, been three different people, end quote. And this is directly inspired by the fact that although Greenspan spoke a good libertarian game early on in the 70s and 80s, he quickly, in pursuit of his own career advancement, went directly down the path of interventionism and attempts at engineering and managing the economy, the complete opposite of what any libertarian worth their salt would do. The guy intervened in every bump in the road, revved up the monetary printing press, constantly fiddled with interest rates, and supported bailouts, despite speaking out against them in his early years. He was full-on Keynesian in nearly every regard, except for his speeches, which is exactly where it doesn't count. Anyone who reads up on him notices that it consistently points out how his behavior as Fed chairman and his early libertarian identity were fiercely at odds with one another. He was constantly compromising his supposed belief in free markets. From the get-go in 1987, Alan Greenspan slashed interest rates to near zero. That is not the behavior of someone who wants to rely on free markets. Alan Greenspan was one man who slashed interest rates, one man who influenced the behavior of nearly every banking institution, financial institution, and nearly every investment house. One man who had all this power because of a government-created creature, and that man gleefully used that power. He became so interventionist that the term Greenspan put was coined, which was essentially a term used to describe how investors in Wall Street would cling to every word he said to try and maneuver themselves around what they thought he would do. I shouldn't have to explain how that is not a sign of Greenspan taking a hands-off free market approach. I mean, when Greenspan jokes about not wanting to say how he's doing lest it might affect the market, that's a pretty good tip-off that he doesn't take a hands-off approach. If he truly was a free market, laissez-faire, hands-off type of Fed chairman, it shouldn't matter what he says about anything, let alone about how he's feeling that day. I mean, give me a break. Sorry, Kyle Kulinski, and sorry to all you Secular Talk fans. Your guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So what are a few other little libertarian things that Greenspan did? And I'm being sarcastic there, just FYI. Well, he supported our bailout of Mexico during the peso crisis, and he said that the intervention of the U.S. must be, quote, massive and fast. And if you need a hint, that's not something a libertarian would advocate for at all. So when Kyle Kulinski tries to say Greenspan was libertarian, that would be like saying George Bush and Obama were pacifists. It just doesn't compute. But moving along, Greenspan also supported one of the biggest bank bailouts in U.S. history of the Continental Illinois National Bank. After this, it was said that by 1989, his, quote, libertarian rejection of bailouts was long gone, end quote. And then he rejected the gold standard because he knew full well the gold standard would stand in his way and disallow him from managing the economy to his fullest extent. Again, totally antithetical to libertarianism or free markets. It makes absolutely no sense to call this guy a libertarian. Then in the early 2000s, he slashed interest rates to near zero, which among a whole plethora of other moral hazards manufactured by government policy and pushes to erode lending standards in an attempt to get low-income people into houses they couldn't afford, this gave way to the housing bubble and the crash of 2008. Again, Greenspan's intervention, while not being the only factor, was still significant in causing the 2008 crash. The main takeaway here is that Greenspan was absolutely not taking a hands-off approach. At no point did Greenspan say, I'm going to stop trying to manage the economy and let interest rates naturalize. That wasn't in his vocabulary. That did not happen because he was not taking a libertarian approach. And the problems we saw during his time and after his time as Fed chairman were absolutely not due to Greenspan being laissez-faire about anything. And by the way, Bernanke didn't help either. So lastly, let me just say, the ending of this video from Secular Talk tries the tired, old, boring, long-since debunked tactic of pinning the 2008 crash on the free market and libertarian ways of thinking, as if libertarians ever really get their way. That's hilarious. Somehow libertarianism is laughed at as an insignificant little nothing that will never amount to anything, but at the same time is viewed as this hulking figure in the background whose worldview is responsible for world financial catastrophes. It's ridiculous. But as usual, either Kulinski doesn't know, or he chooses to omit the hand government had in 2008. He never mentions the Community Reinvestment Act, which was responsible for a significant percentage of these subprime mortgages, which under a free market would have never been given out. He never mentions Barney Frank and his crew constantly railing on about housing as a right and making sure those banks gave out loans they otherwise knew would implode, but winking and nodding the whole way home because the banks knew full well the government would be there to bail them out. Because hell, Greenspan had been playing the bailout game for quite some time at this point, so to pin it on free markets is nothing short of insane. Frankly, this Secular Talk YouTube channel is frightening. It's amazing how people do no research and take what this guy says as gospel when he has no earthly clue what he is talking about. But that is it for now. It was a long video this time. I hope you stayed till the end, but please like, subscribe, and share this video because I want Kyle Kulinski fans to see it and possibly brigade it, but that's okay. But anyway, you take it easy.